U-18 was a Type U-17 U-boat, an early class of coastal submarines built for the Imperial German Navy to operate in the North Sea and the Baltic. These vessels featured a single hull design and used gasoline engines for surface propulsion, reflecting the technological limitations before diesel engines became common. They were designed for reliability in scouting and short-range patrols. The Type U-17 class was originally intended to be the Imperial Navy's first diesel-powered U-boat design. However, when the two boats were ordered in 1910, suitable lightweight diesel engines were not yet available, so gasoline engines were used instead. The subsequent Type U-19 class would become the first true diesel-powered German U-boats. Only two Type U-17 boats were ever completed, U-17 and U-18. U-17 survived the war, was later removed from the Navy roster, and her hull was sold for scrap in February 1920. This made U-18 the only submarine of its small class to be lost in action. U-18 had a displacement of 555 long tons when surfaced and 680 long tons when submerged. She measured 204 feet and 7 inches in length with a beam of 19 feet and 8 inches and a draft of 11 feet and 2 inches. Her maximum diving depth was approximately 164 feet, and her total height from the keel to the top of the conning tower was about 23 feet and 11 inches. The submarine operated with a crew of around 35 personnel, including 4 officers and 25 enlisted sailors, plus additional crew members brought aboard as needed. While in harbor, she carried a small dinghy for transport to and from shore. Ordered on May 6, 1910, the boat cost over 2.3 million gold marks. This was a substantial sum, reflecting the high cost of pre-war submarine construction and her advanced propulsion technology. The propulsion system of U-18 utilized 2 cording 8-cylinder 2-stroke gasoline engines, producing 1,380 shaft horsepower for surface operations. When submerged, the submarine employed 2 AEG electric motors, delivering 1,106 shaft horsepower. Both systems drove 2 propeller shafts. While the boat carried sufficient fuel for extended surface patrols, the gasoline engines presented a significantly higher fire risk compared to later diesel models. Underwater, lead-acid batteries limited her endurance to the short dives typical of early submarines. On the surface, the gasoline engines operated at approximately 550 revolutions per minute. Underwater, the electric motors turned at roughly 425 revolutions per minute. This difference clearly illustrated the distinct torque and efficiency levels between internal combustion and electric power at the time. For armament, the U-boat was equipped with 4 17.7-inch torpedo tubes, 2 forward and 2 aft. She carried a total of 6 torpedoes. A single 4.1-inch deck gun with 300 rounds of ammunition provided surface firepower. She carried no mines and had no anti-aircraft defenses, consistent with her pre-war role as a scout vessel. Over the course of the war, the armament on the Type U-17 class evolved. Because her sister ship, U-17, survived long enough to be modernized, it was upgraded with a 1.5-inch Hotchkiss gun in 1914 and later a 2-inch gun in 1917. U-18 never received these upgrades, as she was lost in November 1914, well before these wartime improvements became standard across the fleet. Engineering solutions of that era prioritized simplicity. A steel plate pressure hull and external ballast tanks allowed for a diving depth of up to 164 feet. The U-boat had a surface speed of 14.9 knots and a submerged speed of 9.5 knots. Her surface range was 6,700 nautical miles at 8 knots, and her submerged range was 75 nautical miles at 5 knots. The diving process was pretty standard for the pre-war years. First, they flooded the external ballast tanks with water to achieve neutral buoyancy. Then, they controlled depth and trim using the bow and stern planes. While this system was simple, it left absolutely no room for error. If the diving planes got damaged, the submarine was doomed, which is exactly what happened to U-18 later on. The armament consisted of 17.7-inch torpedo tubes. These fired the standard torpedoes used by the first generation of German U-boats. On later models, starting with the Type 19 class, Larger 19.7-inch torpedoes became the standard. U-18 was a Type 17 diesel-electric U-boat. It was ordered on May 6, 1910 for the Imperial German Navy. Construction began on October 27th at the State Shipyard in Danzig. For security and quality control reasons, this specific shipyard was the sole builder of all early German U-boats until the outbreak of the war. The submarine was launched on April 25, 1912. After that, they installed 2 paraffin engines for surface running and electric motors for submerged travel. They also fitted 4 torpedo tubes, a deck gun, periscopes, diving planes, and compressed air systems. The U-boat was commissioned on November 17, 1912. Initially, it underwent sea trials in the Baltic Sea. Until the start of World War I, U-18 was based on the island of Heligoland in the North Sea, which served as a forward outpost for German submariners. This was the closest point to British waters. When the war broke out in August 1914, the submarine joined the Second Flotilla. Under the command of Captain Lieutenant Heinrich von Hennig, U-18 completed 3 patrols in the North Sea. Its main mission was reconnaissance, and the crew did not achieve a single confirmed sinking of an enemy vessel. On November 22nd and 23rd, 1914, during its 3rd patrol, U-18 attempted to slip into the British naval base at Scapa Flow. However, the main forces of the enemy fleet were not there. While withdrawing through the Pentland Firth Strait, the U-boat was spotted by the British armed trawler Dorothy Gray. The British vessel rammed the boat, damaging its diving planes. Immediately after that, the submarine was rammed a second time by the destroyer HMS Gary. After taking heavy damage, the crew was forced to scuttle U-18. During these events, 1 sailor died, while 26 other crew members were rescued by the British destroyer. This event marked the first loss of a German U-boat in that war. U-18 had slipped into the bay undetected. It hid behind a steamer that was passing through the defenses in the Hoxa Sound Strait. Getting inside turned out to be easier than expected since the fixed defenses were not yet finished. Once inside, the crew saw that the Grand Fleet had relocated to the west coast of Scotland and Ireland. There was no one to attack. During the withdrawal, lookout Robert Wilson spotted a periscope and raised the alarm. When asked if he could tell a submarine from a whale, he replied that a whale with 25 men on its back would be a very unusual sight. The captain of the trawler, Dorothy Gray, made a quick decision and steered the vessel straight at the periscope, about 1 mile from Hoxa Head. The trawler rammed the U-boat, U-18, rolling it onto its side. The impact bent the periscope at a right angle and damaged the steering and diving planes. Captain von Hennig, unable to maintain a steady depth due to an engine failure, saw his U-boat hit the seabed so hard it bounced to the surface. It submerged again, then struck the bottom a second time at approximately 230 feet. This impact damaged the propellers and started a fire in the battery compartment. When the submarine surfaced again, the destroyer Gary rammed it a second time. This was one of 2 ships sent to intercept the U-boat. With the boat blinded and severely damaged, von Hennig ordered the crew to scuttle it. The sailors opened the seacocks, climbed onto the deck, raised a white flag, and fired star shells to signal their surrender. Since the permanent defenses at the Scapa Flow base were still about 9 months from completion, the Admiralty covered up the true circumstances of this event. They wanted Berlin to believe that U-18 had fallen victim to stationary anti-submarine defenses that did not actually exist yet. As a reward for the capture, a prize court later paid the captain and crew of the trawler Dorothy Gray £500. This was much higher than the standard £200 bounty for destroying a submarine. The money was divided among all members of the crew. Today, the wreck of U-18 lies at a depth of about 246 feet, just outside the entrance to Hoxa Gate, not far from where it was scuttled. U-18 was not the very first German U-boat lost in that war. The smaller submarine U-15 had previously been rammed and sunk by the cruiser Birmingham on August 9, 1914. This happened during an early reconnaissance of the approaches to the Scapa Flow base. The loss of U-18 was especially significant because it occurred during an actual penetration into the harbor itself. Its captain had gathered precisely the kind of intelligence on the base's weak defenses that would have been extremely valuable had he been able to return. The destroyer Gary, which delivered the decisive ramming, was a fleet veteran built in 1905. That September, it was transferred to Scapa Flow specifically for anti-submarine patrols. This placed the ship in the perfect position to intercept U-18. Looking back, the failed penetration by U-18 is often remembered as an early warning of vulnerability. In October 1939, the U-boat U-47, commanded by Gunther Preen, managed to slip into Scapa Flow through a gap in the defenses and sink the battleship Royal Oak. This operation succeeded where the attempt by U-18 in 1914 had failed. Like many other World War I shipwrecks, the remains of U-18 are protected by law as a historic military site and a loss of life site. Divers treat these locations with respect, just as they would any war grave. The Second World War submarine U-18, which met its end at Constanta, was a Type 2B coastal boat. It was built at Kiel and entered service in January 1936, making it a much smaller and more modern vessel than its Imperial-era namesake. During its early career as a Baltic training boat, it sank after colliding with the torpedo boat T-156 in Lübeck Bay in November 1936, killing 8 crew members. The submarine was raised a week later and returned to service the following autumn. In early September 1939, during the opening days of the war, U-18 made an unsuccessful attack on a Polish submarine believed to be ORP Sep. After serving several years in the Baltic, U-18 was selected in 1942, along with several sister Type 2B submarines, for transfer to the Black Sea. The goal was to reinforce the small, local German flotilla and bolster political influence with Turkey. The transfer happened in 2 stages. First, U-Boat 9, U-Boat 19, and U-Boat 24 were chosen in April 1942. Later that August, naval leadership decided a stronger presence was needed, so a second trio, U-Boat 18, U-Boat 20, and U-Boat 23, was brought to Kiel in September to begin the disassembly and transport process. U-Boat 18 was broken into sections, moved overland and along the Danube River to the Romanian port of Galati. There it was reassembled before joining the newly formed flotilla based at Constanta and Feodosia. Together with its sister submarines, the flotilla sank about 26 ships in the Black Sea. This totaled roughly 45,426 deadweight tons, an impressive feat considering each submarine carried only 5 torpedoes. Under its final commander, Karl Flag, U-Boat 18 carried out multiple patrols between the Romanian and Soviet coasts throughout 1943 and 1944. During its Black Sea career, the submarine sank 2 small merchant ships and an auxiliary warship, and damaged another merchant ship and warship. Its performance was modest compared to its sister submarine U-Boat 20. As the most successful of the 6 Black Sea Type 2B submarines, U-Boat 20 single-handedly accounted for 15 enemy ships without losing a single crew member. Meanwhile, U-Boat 23 continued operating until it was intentionally sunk off the Turkish coast in September 1944 to avoid capture. On August 20th, 1944, U-Boat 18 was moored at the Romanian port of Constanta on the Black Sea when it suffered severe damage from a Soviet air raid. The attack targeted naval facilities during intensifying Soviet operations in the region. This left U-Boat 18 unable to continue service and at risk of capture as Romanian forces aligned with the Allies. This raid happened in the middle of a massive Soviet offensive that shattered German and Romanian front lines. It led directly to Romania abruptly switching sides against Germany on August 23, 1944, just 3 days after U-Boat 18 was struck. This political turnabout transformed its home port of Constanta from a secure base into hostile territory almost overnight. To prevent the U-boat from falling into enemy hands, the crew, under the command of Oberleutnant Karl Flag, scuttled U-Boat 18 on August 25, 1944. This happened in the Black Sea, about 12 miles east of Constanta. The evacuation went without casualties, and the sailors safely reached the shore. The boat was immediately declared a total loss due to the severe damage from the air raid. This scuttling was part of a massive withdrawal of the German fleet from the Black Sea in the summer of '44. At that time, the Soviet offensive in Romania forced the abandonment of forward bases, making further submarine operations impossible. Later that year, the Soviet Union raised the wreck of U-18 to the surface. After an inspection, the damaged vessel was deemed beyond repair. On May 26, 1947, during post-war disposal, U-18, along with the previously raised U-24, were torpedoed and sunk south of Sevastopol. They were destroyed by the Soviet submarine M-120. No remains of U-18 survived. Similar sister boats U-9 and U-24 were scuttled during the same operation near Constanta when Romania exited the war. They were also raised by the Soviet Union. U-24 shared the fate of U-18 and was used as a target for M-120 on the same day. The 30th Flotilla itself, created in October 1942, was officially disbanded in 1944, when all its boats were lost, scuttled, or withdrawn from the region. History knows another German U-boat with the same name, but from World War I. SMU-18 completed 3 patrols with the 2nd Flotilla from August to November 1914. It primarily conducted reconnaissance in the North Sea, searching for the British fleet during the early stages of the Battle of the Atlantic. During these operations, it didn't sink a single vessel. In the fall of 1914, the German Navy used U-boats almost exclusively for reconnaissance, rather than for attacking merchant ships. The policy of unrestricted submarine warfare was only announced in February 1915, a few months after the loss of SMU-18. Therefore, its tracking missions were completely typical for the time. The first 2 patrols in early August 1914 passed without any combat engagements, but during the 3rd patrol, which started on November 23rd, SMU-18 attempted a daring breakthrough into the main British naval base at Scapa Flow. Following a steamer through unfinished defenses, the crew discovered that the enemy fleet had temporarily left the anchorage. During the retreat, the U-boat was spotted by patrol ships. They moved in to ram, which forced the crew to scuttle the submarine. Although the operation failed, this incident demonstrated early tactics for using submarines against major naval bases. The short service of SMU-18 helped develop submarine warfare strategy, highlighting the experimental nature of underwater operations at the beginning of the conflict. Despite sinking no ships, the German audacity received official recognition from the British side. A British court paid the crew of the vessel Dorothy Gray £500 sterling for capturing the German U-boat. This amount significantly exceeded the usual reward for sinking or capturing a submarine, which proves how seriously the British took the threat of a breakthrough into their main base. From the beginning of the war, in August 1914, until the loss of the boat on November 23rd, U-18 was commanded by Captain Lieutenant Heinrich von Hennig. He took command early in 1914 and led the submarine through 3 patrols and the attempt to penetrate Scapa Flow. There are no records of any special awards for the crew of U-18, since these operations were not successful. However, von Hennig himself continued to serve in other positions after this incident. There is a great deal of irony in how the German command perceived this episode. In reality, von Hennig had just made an important discovery. The main British fleet anchorage at Scapa Flow had weak defenses. He was on his way back to report this when U-18 went down. Instead of using this information, the German Navy drew the exact opposite conclusion from the loss of the submarine. They decided that the base was actually very well defended. This mistake discouraged new attempts to penetrate Scapa Flow for a long time. Von Hennig, who was born in 1883, survived captivity and lived until 1947. After ending his naval career, he also became famous as a chess player. Before the war, after being commissioned on November 17, 1912, U-18 underwent trials and peacetime exercises under the command of other officers. However, little information has survived about its pre-war commanders. Another submarine with the same name, U-18, a Type 21B model that served in World War II, had a much longer and better documented list of commanding officers. This was because before its final deployment in the Black Sea, it was used for many years as a training U-boat in the Baltic. Its first commanding officer was Hans Palkstadt, who held the position from the time of its commissioning in 1936. Over the following years, he was succeeded by officers like Heinz Bedun, Max Hermann Bauer, and Ernst Mengersen. The latter would go on to receive the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross for his service in other units. Later on, command was assumed by Hans Heinz Linder, Ernst Vogelsang, Hans Achim von Rosenberg-Gruzinski, and Friedrich Wilhelm Wissmann. The final commanding officer was Karl Fleig, who led the U-boat during the Black Sea campaign right up until its sinking in Constanza in August 1944.